In the following tutorial, we'll be going over how to set up TeamSync against Microsoft Entra ID. Now, TeamSync is a feature within GitHub that enables you to synchronize your IDP groups with your teams in GitHub. The benefit this provides to you is being able to automatically map what you already have in your IDP within GitHub. This enables you to, for example, automate the provisioning of your users to specific repos or grant them specific rights in the case of Copilot. Maybe you have a dedicated team that you want only those users to have access to Copilot, but you do not want to have to manage them on both locations. You do not want to have to maybe add them within your IDP and then have to add them in GitHub. So what this feature does is that it streamlines that capability. So the moment you add that user to the group in your IDP, and if that group has already been granted access to the enterprise application in Microsoft Entra ID, then that group will automatically be provisioned to the team and therefore be granted access within GitHub. Now, it's important to mention that TeamSync is not a replacement for SCIM. In order for this setup to work, you must have already set up SAML for user authentication and SCIM for user provisioning. With that being said, I'm going to jump over to GitHub. And if you go under settings, scroll a little bit down, you're going to be able to see that we already have SAML enabled. And if we jump over to Azure, and I'm going to go into my enterprise applications, and I'm going to go ahead and look for my application. In this case, the name of my application is the same name of my org. This is just something I've set up. Your name could be different. We go within that application. I just want to check that provisioning has been set up. So I can see my SAML application has been configured. If we go under provisioning, I can see that provisioning has already been enabled. It has yet not run, but it is enabled. If I also go ahead and check my settings, it's already done. It's already set in automatic. And if I go into admin credentials, I can already see it's on the correct endpoint. So everything looks okay from the provision side of things from Microsoft Entra ID. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go back into GitHub and scroll a little bit down and start enabling TeamSync. To enable TeamSync, all I have to do is click on Enable for Entra ID. The moment that I do, I am taken, or I'm going to be redirected to my identity provider so I can ensure that I have the privileges so I can set this up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Enable TeamSync. Now, this will ask me to authenticate. It's important that you're authenticating against your super admin account so we are able to enable TeamSync. Once I do, that's for the permissions, which is going to be able to read my group membership, read my users, sign in, and read user profile. I'm going to go ahead and click Accept. And now it's asking me for the authorization request. I'm going to click Approve. Once done, I have already enabled team synchronization. Great. Now, it's important to mention that TeamSync will not automatically re-invite past members of this organization if they were removed by the org owner. So what does that even mean? Let's say that you had an org user that you removed, but that org user belongs to a group within your IDP. If this checkbox is marked or enabled, TeamSync will recognize that and will not try to re-invite them. Now, if you wanted to re-invite them because maybe you're setting up your setup from scratch, you can just go ahead and deselect this option and save your settings. What would happen is that TeamSync will try to re-invite those members. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save here. Now, once saved, I'm going to go back into my overview. And from here, I'm going to go into Teams. Now, before I start creating any teams, I'm going to go back into Microsoft Entra ID. From within Entra ID, I'm going to go ahead and go back into my application. And under users and groups, I'm going to go ahead and add another group. And click assign. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because the moment I'm setting up TeamSync, I will be able to see all of the groups within my tenant. But if I add a group that has not yet been provisioned or granted access to the application, those users will not be provisioned and synchronization will not work. It's important that whatever group we're adding to TeamSync has been added to the application. Now, since I've already added my group to my application, I'm going to go ahead and go back into TeamSync and create a new group. I'm going to start this by creating a new team by clicking on New Team. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this Microsoft Entra ID Admins. Now the description can be empty, but the description is really just whatever you want it to be. You're going to notice you have a field called Identity Provider Groups. From the Identity Provider Groups, you're going to select from the drop down, Select Groups. And you're going to notice that I have all the groups that are within my Microsoft Entra ID. Now, this goes back to what I was saying, that's important that we only select the group that we have granted access to. In this case, I'm going to select Microsoft Entra ID, Jack Test Group. If we go back into Microsoft Entra ID, that is the same group I have here. The reason that is because if I were to select any other group that is not here, meaning that they do not have access to authenticate against the application, your users will not be able to authenticate. They will most probably get 403 errors, and on top of that, you might experience synchronization issues. It is also important to mention at this point that we do not support nested groups, meaning that if your group has other groups within it, GitHub will be unable to pull those users. Now that I've selected the group that I want to keep in sync with my team, there's a couple of options I have, such as team visibility. This just pretty much means that if I'm doing a pull request and within the comments I want to add the group name or team name just to call them out, for example, at Microsoft Entra ID _ Jack _ test group, please validate this. This will notify everybody that belongs to that group. And then team notification is just, when somebody adds that group, the users will be notified. So now that I've created and selected my options, I'm going to go ahead and click on Create Team. After I create my team, of course, my user is there because I am the one creating that group team, but it still says one group unsynced. Now, this will take a couple of minutes in order to be able to synchronize. If I go back, for example, to my organization, and then I go to Settings, scroll a little bit down to Authentication Security, and then from here, scroll a little bit down, you will already see that this has changed to one team managed in Entra ID. If I click on View Activity, I will be able to see any of the activity that's happening. So far, that sync has still to kick off, but this is pretty much how you set up TeamSync for Microsoft Entra ID.